Let's have a lesson and discussion on this work. Follow the lesson for free and just pick up all the tips from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of all 25 etudes in Carcassi's Op.60, and there's a link for that in the description. So etude number 15 focuses on arpeggios and with a little bit of melodic contour to it. However, it's not really strictly a melody. There's just some figuration in there. So a large part of this particular etude is the quality of the arpeggios and just the harmonies themselves and how they move and the cadences involved in the different sections in the piece. It's a little bit longer as well, so with a very repetitive texture, so the opportunity for some musicality in terms of phrasing and a little bit of rubato really helps this piece and bring out the sections of the piece and make it feel a little bit more musical than like a repetitive etude. So let's just talk about that. So we have this arpeggio pattern, and it always progresses like that. So we have this little, we have the chord with a little upper auxiliary. So that the top note, these are all chord tones, then a non-chord tone returning to a chord tone. So although that can be perceived as a little melody, the only issue is that it's the same contour every single time, making it less of a melody and more of just like a melodic figuration within the arpeggio, adding that non-chord tone. So in this particular case, I don't think you need to separate the voices and practice them separately. You can actually practice the full chords. So let's talk about that as well. We'll talk a little bit about the tempo and the musicality in a second, but in terms of practicing these arpeggios, you could start the practice off with just playing the chords themselves without the upper auxiliary. And go through the piece just learning those chord shapes. That can be very beneficial for teaching the left hand the actual shapes involved. Maybe a next step would be to add that upper auxiliary. But still in block chords. Again, just to teach the left hand the shapes involved in the piece. However, when you actually go to play the piece, in order to play it legato, you're going to have to always grab the bass note first in order to connect the chords as smoothly as possible. So block chord shape practice is really beneficial to your muscle memory and your knowledge of the overall chord shape. However, in terms of legato, we must just get the next bass note, especially when we shift. You must just get that note because these other notes are ringing out. That's great. Instead of having to grab the whole chord shape, you should just focus on, because you have to hold this to the last possible moment, get that bass note, and then you can get the rest of the notes after you achieve that shift. This is a very micro level of getting legato from chord to chord. But it's very important. When you actually start picking up speed, you don't have time to grab the full chord shape, as well as you don't have time to, it's not beneficial to you to let go of all the notes of the previous chord, lift your fingers completely off, grab all the notes of the next chord and put them down. It's just not as efficient as getting that one single note first and then getting the rest of the notes. It's just much more legato that way. So that's two ways of practice: block chords and then a very legato focused oriented way where you focus on getting the next bass note of the chord. So that's some ways to practice it. Now, in terms of the musicality of the piece, I think it's really important that you add a little bit of rubato to the piece. Maybe some speeding up here. Even there, like that's not, I wouldn't even call that rubato, I'd call it just more phrasing. But that little bit of relaxation after I reach the top of that crescendo there, especially here. And you start again. You know, it really, instead of playing it very strictly, it's a little bit repetitive and it's going to go on for a really long time. So I would definitely add some of that phrasing, touch of rubato to just break up the piece a little bit and get it feeling a little bit more natural. I did practice it with the metronome a lot, and I think it's very beneficial to you to practice it with the metronome in order to make sure that you're confident getting those shifts in tempo so that you can progress from one chord to the next and really clean up your left hand playing and right hand playing too, and push the tempo forward. So I use the metronome a lot for that. You can actually see on my page, I don't know if you can see that, but I have like all these different numbers with cross marks through it, just showing me my progress as I upped the tempo little bit by little bit over time. So yeah, using the metronome, great, but then in order to impart that phrasing onto the piece, you really need to turn it off and to relax and make sure you're playing musically. So let's just do a quick walk through the piece now. There's not much to say because it's all the same texture pretty much. There's just a couple of little oddities that will point out as we go. Starting with that first squeeze of the first finger. It's a reality of this piece. There's a few places where you have to hold a normal chord shape, squeeze a finger in to get it, because the rest of the chord shapes, you need to maintain common shapes. So we squeeze the first finger in there. We'll go slower. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not a hard stretch. It's just irregular, so you just have to know it. I would actually release the bar there. There's a good example of where you really have to get that bass note first. Measure 7, stay in 5th position, then shift. Measure 9. So there's a few spots in this piece where, fingers are kind of down and it's a little bit awkward to shift sometimes. So again, because the phrase is kind of ending there, just kind of start fresh on that new note. So you just kind of close off the previous idea and then just do a clean shift and start again. Pivot out of that bar, so you're barring 3 strings. Pivot out, but keep your first finger on that G sharp. Shift up. I use 2-3 here, and it might seem awkward at first, but obviously there's a good reason for it, is that 1 gets to play afterwards. My recommendation here is keep your second finger down and do a freaky little stretch just to connect that. It's only for a moment. It's not difficult. It's just, again, irregular. Nice little change. There's a few spots where you just have to jump fingers quite quickly, but again, you just place it nicely. Now, from measure 28 on, in a way, I kind of consider measure 36 onward to be an extended coda, just like a cadence. It's actually just a big extended cadence from measure 36 onward to the end. But even going all the way back, the piece is kind of over at measure 28. Like, he's done the final cadence there. The repetition of the material is over. So we kind of just had this like ABA section, ABA form, and then the piece is kind of over. So in many ways from measure 28 onward is a large extended coda, because not much is happening, but there is still some activity going on. So certainly from 36 onward, we just have cadence material. Not much going on musically, except the tension of the piece about to end, right? But even going all the way back to 28, we're kind of done with the material that he's presented, and we're really just going towards the final cadence. So from measure 28. And the dynamics are kind of important here. Playing softly, and then let it come out. Softly, come out. I would do it here too, even though he doesn't mark it. Softly. Just a big cadence. Do it again. And certainly here is a big extended cadence. I tried to finger this in many different ways, and in some ways it would have been nice to actually just squeeze the second finger onto F. But I thought it would, for the average player, I think that's a little bit awkward to do that particular shape, to squeeze the second finger in. So I didn't use it. It's just a little too irregular. It's not great. It's not great for students to do like really weird fingering sometimes. So because it's not good for their hand positions and stuff. So I went with a different fingering. I'll leave it up to you whether you use mine, which switches to the second finger. But the disadvantage of the fingering that I used is that you end up with the second finger playing last, and then you have to quickly jump over. So there's an opportunity for a hiccup when you switch from chord to chord. However, if you place that bass note kind of firmly and confidently, it doesn't bother me. You know, you just you make sure the previous note gets a certain amount of sustain, and then you just confidently place the next one very purposely, on purpose, and then it sounds completely acceptable and predictable and normal. But there's going to be a small clip because you have to jump that second finger over. The only other alternative, though, would be to slide that second finger up to avoid that. Also not a great solution. You could try using your fourth finger or something, but you kind of need it for up here, so you'd get freaky really quickly. So I'm recommending students use my fingering that I put in the book, but if you want to squeeze the second finger in, you can give that a try. So from measure 36. Do it a lot of times. You can tell I'm pretty comfortable covering it up. It's one of those things, as you get to the more advanced levels in classical guitar, there's going to be these things from the instrument where there's just no getting around a jumping of a finger in the worst possible spot. But you do you gain an awareness of how the sound works. So when you play a note, that note kind of enters the room and starts reverberating in the room. And if you clip it too soon, you'll get a clip and you'll hear that. But if you kind of let it just expand just enough to get out into the room and resonating in the guitar body, then you'll find that you can actually do the shift. Plus, because it's an E, the resonance from the low E string, just from it vibrating, actually kind of gives the illusion that E is still ringing, which really helps as well. So just don't mute out that low E. And it's not that noticeable. That one was, because I didn't do it very smoothly. So it's just something to be careful about, and to practice at the end, just being particularly purposeful with the way that you shift from one chord to the next to make it sound intentional and musical at the same time. It's not my favorite etude, but actually as I played it more and more, I started to like it a little bit more because it is a true etude. That texture is very secure. You have a lot of tasks to do, and as I started bringing up the tempo, I started realizing that the piece started to come together better in terms of just listening to the harmony and enjoying the harmony of the piece. Playing it slowly at first was like a lot of the same thing, and it's quite long. But as I got the piece going and started adding more rubato and getting to know the piece better, I started to like it quite a bit, and it offered a couple of challenges for me to work on as well, to smooth out and to refine a couple of things. So I could work on it a lot more, but I have to keep going through these. But I did find it beneficial, so I liked it in the end.